Hello, I'm Roland Bettis. This is Alamo Music Center, San Antonio, Texas. Hop online to alamomusic.com and check out all the gear that we have to offer. Lots of cool stuff there and good discounts as well. Be sure to hop on the YouTube channel and subscribe to the Alamo Music Sound Lab. We've got tons of videos, past, present, and future coming up. Lots of synthesizers, classic and new, effects processors and samplers and more of that kind of stuff. Be sure to subscribe and check it out. The Roland SH201. What exactly is it? Well, it's kind of a cool keyboard. There's some negative things to it, but there's a lot of positives to it. It was unveiled in 2006, and it wasn't really Roland's strongest synthesizer of that era. You know, around that time frame was the Roland V-Synth and a couple of other really cool things like the JP8000. So this was their stab at, again, like Roland does, they wanted to put out a keyboard that offered some of their analog-esque type of things in a much more economical price point to reach another clientele. I think they were pretty successful with it. I should note that this is the first SH synthesizer since the SH of the 1980s era, the SH-101. So this is kind of like their follow-up to that SH-101, SH-201. Makes sense, right? It still offers some pretty good power behind the hood. You get 2 oscillators with it. You do have a little bit more by way of, oscillators compared to, say, the SH-101. You've got your sawtooth, sine, pulse, etc., but you also have noise, feedback oscillator, and the super saw element. Super saw was kind of like their 2000 thing. The JP8000 was all over the super saw waveform, and so was the V-Synth. And for me and many others, the super saw synth pads and the strings and brasses are really an amazing thing that you can't achieve on any other synthesizer. Not quite like the Rolands of that era, that is. So you do have that super saw synth as an oscillator function. I should note that on the panel you've got one control layout for oscillator 1. There's a little button that's illuminated when you click on oscillator 1, or if you click on oscillator 2, that panel changes to the functions of oscillator 2. They also do that with the LFO section. So LFO 1 is all that. Click on LFO 2 and you have all that once again. Speaking of the LFOs, of course they go a little bit further than the SH-101. You've got, again, your typical sine, saw, triangle, etc., but you do have random, which is kind of cool, and you do have a lot of destination patching for the LFOs. So you can assign the LFO to your pitch, obviously, your pulse width, filter. You can assign it to the audio filter, which is kind of cool. There is an audio filter input on this keyboard, which is really neat. And although it's not a true analog filter, it still has some cool sound to it. So by way of routing audio to the input, you can route it to the LFO and then have the LFO go crazy all over what you're driving in through the analog input. It's really kind of neat. So as you can see by now, there's a lot of really cool things on this keyboard that you typically wouldn't find at the price point that is at this keyboard. When it was unveiled, I want to say it was about $1,300-ish, brand new. On the used market, they range pretty drastically, anywhere from $300 to about $600 on the used market. And I think for that kind of price point, it's a very strong synth. I do like the fact that it's got full-size keys, which is kind of cool. And the keys actually feel really good. It's not some cheesy keybed. They used your typical Roland keybed, which is a good, solid keybed. You do have 32 presets, and you can make 32 of your own. Preset and user banks right over here. You do have an effects section, which obviously you never had on some of the older synthesizers. You've got reverb and delay. And while the delay is actually kind of cool, the reverb is very dated to the early 2000 era. I always find myself just taking off the reverb and delay and using external effects. You know, a good Eventide pedal or an Eventide processor or a lexicon always goes a little bit farther than what you could find on board on some of these Roland keyboards of the 2000s era. The filter is pretty self-explanatory. It's, -12, -24 switchable, which is kind of neat. You do have your cutoff, your resonance, key follow, and of course you've got your low pass, high pass, and band pass. You can also bypass the filter all the way around, which I'm not sure why you'd want to do that, but it's there. Overall, the build quality of this keyboard is fair. It's very plasticky. It just looks plasticky, but again, once you dive in and start creating some sounds, you can really hear and get past the look of it. To me, the look was never really the strongest point of this keyboard. It's the sound. You have a little bit of a recorder section on this side. You've got an arpeggiator built in. What I don't like about the arpeggiator and the sequencer is that you don't have a dedicated readout for what the BPM is. So if you're trying to match stuff up with your DAW or an external drum machine that was set at, say, 120 BPM, you can't really dial in 120 precisely. It does follow MIDI beat clock, so if you're using an external sequencer on a DAW, you can drive its sequencer with its beat clock, no problem there. But if you're doing like the live gigging thing and you're trying to match BPMs, it's pretty difficult. That said, it's still a very cool thing to have a recorder and an arpeggiator built in at this kind of price point. You do have the D-Beam on board, which was again another early 2000s to late 2000s era Roland thing. And the D-Beam for me never really was something substantial. It's a cool little gimmicky kind of thing, but I never found it useful in live performance, and definitely did find it useful in the studio. Although if you're looking for that wow effect on stage, I guess it can kind of do that, kind of like a theremin kind of thing. That is on board, and that can be routed to different things on the keyboard: filter, expression, etc., volume. But all in all, a pretty basic synthesizer, basic envelope sections, not too much to talk about, not too much to write home about. Again, I did want to highlight this particular model of keyboard because it is a synthesizer that time forgot. When it first came out, it didn't make a huge splash. They didn't sell too many of them. On the used market, they kind of went sporadic. And for a few years, though, you really couldn't find any of them anywhere. They're starting to resurface. I guess people are kind of digging into their garage and finding out stuff that endeavors they went through to try to play music and decided, no, it's not for me. So on the used market online, you can start to see these kind of cropping up here and there just a little bit. And again, the price points are really valid and fair. The last thing I'd like to note about this keyboard is the fact that it does have MIDI and USB. That's kind of neat, so you can hook it up to your DAW, computer, and of course MIDI to any other external device as well. One thing I should note is the input section I was talking about earlier is not a 1/4 inch jack, it's not an XLR jack, they're RCA jacks. And so in 2005 through 2007, Roland made a lot of different boxes that utilize RCA ins and outs. Matter of fact, there's a Roland effects processor, I think it's called the EF303, that was RCA in and out. And that was kind of like one of the boxes they meant were supposed to pair together with this keyboard to develop a full-on system. There was the Roland SP202 sampler, there was the Roland DR202 drum machine, and that EF303 effects processor. All of them had 1/4 inch and RCAs, mostly RCAs. And all those components that they released in that era were supposed to make a really cool, massive system together. I wish I had some of those other pieces to demonstrate it, but unfortunately I just landed this one on the used market recently and didn't have time to look for much of the other stuff. But in any case, enough talk about this cool little keyboard. Let's check it out in action. Let's play some sounds. I really hope you enjoy checking out this Roland SH201. It is kind of a quirky, oddball kind of synthesizer, and it does have that 2000-esque look to it. But as you heard, it still has a lot of power behind the hood. Cool little keyboard for sure. Check us out online, alamomusic.com. Hop on the YouTube channel and subscribe. It's Alamo Music Sound Lab. Lots of videos coming up. Stay tuned and check it out. Thanks.